Welcome to Intro to Soldering Part 2, how to solder two wires together. First, let's prepare our wires for soldering. The first step is to identify what wires you're going to use and to strip the wires to get them to the proper length. To strip the wires, you use your wire stripper, find the correct size. This is a 16 gauge, and gently pull that plastic sleeve off. And you're left with a wire that looks like this. Twist that braided wire so that it's all nice and tight and snug. Do the same for the other side, which I've already prepared. Now we need to splice these two wires together. There are two main ways of doing this. One is called a pigtail, where you put them right next to each other and just twist. Personally, I think that looks kind of ugly, sloppy, lazy, just doesn't look as good. So I like to do what's called the inline. Take the two wires, cross them about halfway, and then twist them inline around each other to give you one that looks like this. The next thing you want to do is make sure that your soldering iron is plugged in. So you plug that in at the electrical box, turn on the soldering iron, make sure it's set to the correct temperature. Typically you want to use cooler temperatures when soldering really delicate electronics. When soldering something really big and fat, if you have really big fat wires, you want to be a little bit higher. I wouldn't consider this really fat wires, but certainly, a 16 gauge wire is big enough that we want decent heat. So I've set mine to 700 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a pretty decent temperature. We could probably go a little bit higher. Let's go 740, 750, there we go, 750. The next thing we want to do is prepare the iron for the soldering. Specifically, we want to make sure that the element is clean. This oxidizes very, very quickly, and a rusty tip is going to be terrible at passing the heat to the wire. When we're ready to solder, we typically would turn on our fume extractor. It's not actually really loud, but on camera it sounds really loud. Look at this. See, in person, you'll notice it's not too loud, but on camera it sounds so loud right now. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to be soldering without the fume extractor. I'm only doing a little bit. I'm going to keep my face away from the rosin, so I will be totally fine and safe. Don't worry. The basic philosophy of soldering is that we want to heat up the wire and apply solder to the wire. The number one mistake that I see brand new solderers is they apply solder to the iron and they try to paint it on, and then they see that there's solder on there, so they think, that's going to be a good connection, when really it is a horrible connection. It will break easily and will have a big amount of resistance in your circuits. Instead, we want to heat up the wires and apply the solder to the wires. For that to happen, we need to make sure that the tip is extremely clean. The soldering iron oxidizes very quickly, and a dull tip is going to conduct heat a lot worse than a shiny tip. To get it clean, there's a couple different ways, but the way I like to do it is just apply a little bit of solder, then wipe that solder off using either the brass sponge or a wet sponge. If you can see on the video, the tip is now very, very shiny and clean. Next, I like to apply just a little bit of solder again, because this tiny little wet dot is going to help to conduct heat really effectively. So I'll put that wet dot right on the wires that I want to heat up, and usually within just a second or two, you will notice that the solder starts to flow nicely to this joint that we want to heat up. When done, wipe off the tip so that it's clean, put it back in the stand. The wire still may be a little bit warm, so you typically want to give it a few seconds to cool down, especially if it's a big fat wire. It can retain a lot of heat for a long while. And holding this in my hand, I can still feel that it's pretty warm. But now you have a good solid joint. Honestly, between you and me, this was kind of a blob. I could do a much better job than that.